Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this lovely Saturday morning here in Madison. I know we have lots of international people from all around the world. Thanks for taking time in this Saturday to join us. As I mentioned, one of our panelists is running a bit late, so we're going to get started and switch up the order a little bit of the presentations, and hopefully our third speaker will join us so we can hear that presentation after the other two. And also, as I mentioned, our scheduled panel chair, Laurence Monet, unfortunately can't make it this morning with technical difficulties. So I'll be doing some pinch panel chairing for her. I don't have a lot of notes about the speaker, so my introduction will be very brief, but I encourage the speakers to add more information about themselves if they'd like us to know. So we'll start this morning with Malika Basu from Kalna College, University of Burdwan in West Bengal. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these words. Her topic this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, is Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Education in Colonial India, Understanding the History of Historical Science. So I'll pass the baton over to you, Malika. Looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Gregory. A very good morning and good evening from India. Am I audible?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Sure. Yes. Good morning and good evening from India. Myself, Malika Basu Ghosh from the Department of History, Kalna College. Convey my warm regards to all of you. I convey my regards to my chairperson. I also convey my regards to all the participants who are all over the world who are watching at this moment. And my special gratitude to the University of Wisconsin, Madison School of Pharmacy, and the American Institute for the History of Pharmacy. My special thanks to Kristen Hossett and Gregory Bond for their valuable assistance. Really, it's a great privilege for me to come to this dais here today. However, the title of my presentation is History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Education in Colonial India, Understanding the History of a Historical Science. Now, before going to the details of my discussion, I would like to highlight one crucial point that why I have chosen pharmacy and pharmaceutical education as my topic of discussion. Now, the story of the evolution of medicine have a long history stretching from prehistory to modern times. Since ancient pharmacy is a separate and complementary healthcare profession concerned with collection, preparation, standardization, and dispensing drugs. The story of the evolution of since ancient times, pharmacy is a separate and complementary healthcare profession concerned with collection, preparation, standardization, and dispensing drugs. Much before the recorded history, primitive men used substances for medicinal purposes. History of pharmacy is inextricably associated with the history of medicine. An important theme in the history of medicine is its relationship with medicine and how the boundaries between the professions came to be mediated and defined, which took place in different civilizations and in different periods. Now, history of pharmacy is inextricably associated with the history of medicine. History of pharmacy and pharmaceutical education as an important facet of the application of alchemical knowledge in India. Now, before going to the my discussion in details, I would like to highlight in another point that is also very important, like any event lies within the limits of time and space. So now it is my endeavor to see how was the beginning of the knowledge of pharmacy, how at the dawn of our civilization. So let us turn back to our ancient civilizations. Humans were using medicinal products to treat themselves far back to the humanity. Prehistoric humans learned it from census, observation of nature. Prehistoric men used leaves, mud, and cool water to stop bleeding and heal wounds. Dry clay was used to splint broken legs. By trial and observation, early humans kept on learning from the nature to eradicate different health problems. Now I come to the Indian context. Our medical heritage reveals that the art and science of medicine is as old as the mankind itself. This science of medicine has a god in different civilizations. Different gods have some connections with this disease. Different civilizations reveal that several gods governing the art of medicine. There is the mythical. You see in the right hand corner the picture of Lord Dhanvantari, that is regarded in our civilization as an ancient god of Hindu medicine. Now, I would like to say here one thing, that the original conception of Hindu medicine in its entirety is essentially linked to Dhanvantari, who is considered as the god of Hindu medicine. The use of the term Dhanvantari generally refers to the god of Ayurveda. Into this mundane world, having learned in its entirety from Indra, the lord of immortals. Now he was named Dhanvantari after his father Dhanna, a king in the Chandra dynasty. Dhanu means a foreign body. Dhannu Shalla Shastram Tatya Antam Param Yarti Gachati Dhanvantari. Thus, Dhanvantari is one who relieves the suffering of the body and the mind. Even in common usage, an efficient and successful physician is called Dhanvantari. Dhanvantari, the pot of, you see in the picture of the Lord Dhanvantari with the pot of ambrosia on one hand, and which symbolizes life. Dhanvantari is a deity of health and happiness, is considered the incarnation of Lord Vishnu, a mythical deity. And we also find in the left, in the another picture, as you see, of the churning milk ocean, there we find that there was a constant tussle, between the god, son of the gods, and demons. And during that time, there was the churning of the milk ocean, that you find the mountain Moinak being visible, and the serpent Vasuki acting as the churning thread, and one after another many divine things came out. At last came Lord Dhanvantari with ambrosia on one hand and Ayurveda on the other. Now I move to the next point, is the practice of pharmacy in ancient India. The beginning of any event lies within the limits of time and space. And here I would like to highlight one thing, that how our pharmacy practice was done in ancient India. Now, two things are important. Who was the teacher of pharmacy and who is the student? And in ancient India, this is called we call it the Guru Shishya, or the teacher-student parampara training. Where you find in the picture there the Guru sitting on his residential Guru, it is called the Gurukula, a residential school in his house, and the students are learning sitting beside him, and they are taking lessons. And here we find the philosophy of the teacher-student interdependence in the Gurukula. A teacher must have some divine character along with the professional qualities of observation, power of justification. On the other hand, a student must have patience, politeness, purity, truthfulness, aptitude, memory, responsibility, concentration, and so on. But before going to the British period, it becomes imperative to me to delve into the pharmacy practice in ancient India. Like in the pre-Vedic period, the practice of pharmacy in ancient India was mainly dominated by the religion and their mystic faith, And the Vedic faith period, then comes the Vedic period when medicine was developed as an adjunct to religion. And lastly, the most important period, the post-Vedic or the Ayurvedic period, and the highest peak of the glory of Indian medicine was achieved during this period. Next, I come to the development of pharmacy in medieval India. Here we find that during medieval period, a popular philosophical religious movement started, and that is called the Tantrism. And that the Tantrism developed the art and the science of the use of metallic compounds, as you see through a schematic diagram. I've tried to portray this, that in the Tantrism period, we find the metallic compounds being used like mercury, sulfur, gold, silver. And the major philosophy behind it was elixir of life, imperishable and ever young. In this period, exchange of medical knowledge did take place between India and Arab practitioners, and numerous alchemical texts were written, namely Rasha Hridaya Tantra, by Sri Govind Vallabhan, Sharshunda Churamani by the Somdeva, Rasaratna Samuchaya by Bhagavata were of importance, very important books during that time. Now I come to the discourse of pharmacy in British India and the discourse of Western medicine and the beginning of medico-pharmaceutical profession. Now here, as you see, again, I have tried to explain it to a schematic diagram that the pharmacy which we practice today is largely based on the Western medical system, which began with the advent of the Europeans. Medical encounters did take place between the Ayurvedic practitioners and the Western medicine. Imperial supremacy tried to universalize pharmacy and pharmaceutical profession on a scientific order. The whole gamut of medical pharmaceutical profession was categorized under medicos and along with subordinate medical pharmaceutical professions, as you see here, the first being, as you see here, apothecaries. Apothecaries is the one which studied medicinal formula, therapeutic compounds, practiced surgery and diagnosed diseases. And in 1617, in British India, apothecaries made relation with the grocers' company and gradually formed the Society of Apothecaries. Early part of the 18th century, apothecaries achieved some recognition as medical pharmaceutical practitioners. Later, to gain more popularity, the course was institutionalized. Next comes the hospital assistant. Initially, they were designated as dressers, but later this designation was abolished, giving way to the grade of hospital assistant. The basic criteria was to qualify an examination and spend 1 year in compounding anatomy, physiology, medicine, surgery, midwifery, etc. And they were later changed to the status of sub-assistant surgeon. Comes the compounders community. Basically, compounders and dressers were a preliminary step to the training apothecaries. Initially, they did not have any status and were neglected, and they're very much ill-paid, and the practice of pharmacy was very pathetic. And they were just an utilitarian appendage to the medical system. And then comes the qualified chemist and druggist. By the middle of the 19th century, these professionals were getting scientifically trained. Chemist and druggist class started in 1874, but in colonial period, it was not very easy to practice pharmacy profession as of today. Different changes took place, but before independence, it gained status of a full respectable profession. They became a considered as a respectable profession, and practitioners were recognized as medical pharmaceutical professionals. Now I come to the last episode of my discussion, where I want to highlight colonial modernity and the beginning of pharmaceutical education. Now you see that during that time there were no drug or pharmacy law in the country, and no restriction on opening a drug shop, dispensing of prescriptions, and so what was necessary was pharmaceutical education. So that became an obvious consequence. Now, the beginning was made with the Madras Medical College, as you see, Madras Medical College here in 1860, and it was the beginning of pharmaceutical education. And before independence of several other allied courses of pharmacy was also introduced here. In Bengal Presidency, as we find, the beginning was made. The beginning was made here beginning was made in 1881 and failed later around 1920-21. And the Calcutta University first introduced pharmaceutics as a branch of pharmacology concerned with medicine, sale of medicinal drugs, preparation, use, and sale of medicinal drugs as a specialization, also as an applied chemistry. And here you also can see the picture of Jyotish Chandra Ghosh, who was a philanthropic pharmacist. Jyotish Chandra Ghosh, his contribution was immense so far as the Bengal presidency is concerned. In the Bombay presidency and other presidencies, the situation was quite alarming. There was no rules regarding pharmacy training. And in the United Provinces, the scheme for training started in 1928. The United Province means Allahabad, Agra, Meerut. The degree level program started at Benares Hindu University, particularly in 1932. And here you see the picture of Professor Mahadeva Lal Shroff as an important figure. Gradually, Bombay University, Punjab, started Bachelor of Pharmacy course in 1940s. Thus, in brief, this is what I want to portray in my discussion. And I will going to the conclusion. Since ancient times, pharmacy is a separate and complementary healthcare profession. To ascertain new medical system in India, British rules introduced Western medicine as a new scientific tool of the empire. This ideology of supremacy was nothing but a colonial mission to pave Western scientific supremacy. Institutionalization of pharmacy and pharmaceutical education was a new colonial discourse to control the whole medical system with power and supremacy. Now, I want to tell you something here which will make you happy also, I think. And this is my publication, and this is my book published just in this month itself. And this is the first book on the history of pharmacy in India, and it was co-published. It is co-published by Routledge, UK. And this is all. And thank you, namaskar. Thank you all for your patience.
That was great. Thanks for that whirlwind tour of the history of pharmacy and pharmaceutical science in India, Malika. Very interesting. I forgot to mention at the outset of the panel, we'll be taking questions at the end of this panel after both presentations. I see we're getting some questions already in the chat box down here. So questions for any panelist, please keep sending the text box. Now we'll turn to our second paper this morning. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce this name. Nisant Kunakati Shaji from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute will be talking about grappling with morphine, a local history of painkiller use in Kerala, India. So I'll turn the presentation over to you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. Just a second. I think I can hear a few sounds. Okay. Okay. Just to begin, once again, thanks to the people at AHP for having this fantastic conference, and thanks for giving me a chance to present as well. And also, finally, thanks to Professor Nancy to help me think in very interesting ways in regarding to this project. And as to the picture, this is a particular. I thought like this. This is a picture that I commissioned for a heavy metal website that I run. And so I thought it would be perfect with the theme of the conference. It's festive and decadent at all the same time. Uh, yeah. So grappling with morphine, a local history of painkiller use in Kerala, India. This is my topic. I've had prior experience in sort of within palliative care, where I worked with the volunteers who run palliative care units back in Kerala, and that's my prior experiences. So this is like an offshoot of that particular project. Okay, so this is basically a palliative care vehicle. I sort of symbolize, I mean, just to symbolize it as a journey to begin my session. Now let's broadly get into the meat of the matter. I'm just to like broadly talk about the lay of the land of what I'm talking about and what the argument of the paper is. So voices opposing the lack of access to painkillers for pain relief and palliative care in low and middle income countries have been on the rise from the 1990s onwards. This lack of access is co-constituted by the overabundance of painkillers and their diversion to high income nations to the detriment of low and middle income countries. India has been no exception to this, and a large number of palliative care specialists and advocates have termed this as a serious crisis of unattended pain. India is a place where the availability and by extension, the access to the opioid morphine is severely constrained. Several legal, economic, and social entanglements consolidate and maintain these constraints. In Kerala, the southern state in India, which has had a long history of palliative care and wider coverage when compared to the rest of India, the restrictions governing morphine access are commonly known. This then primes Kerala as a site to explore these said varied effects of constrained painkiller use. The primary painkiller used in pain relief has been morphine, for years considered to be the gold standard in painkiller delivery. And yet, morphine's availability remains elusive in many low and middle income countries. Morphine in its most preferred form is orally administered to patients suffering from excessive pain. Morphine sulfate is the chemical form of oral morphine, which is derived from the opium gum of the poppy plant. But due to its addictive qualities and its prepotent position in the addiction epidemics around the world, opium, and by extension morphine, has been subject to stringent and sometimes draconian measures in its production and disbursement. In this paper, I argue that this scarcity of painkillers in low and middle income countries is driven by a certain central asymmetry in which the health of the developed countries is valued over that of the much poorer countries that comprise the rest of the world. To elucidate this point, I argue that by looking into the history of various legal institutions that were brought to bear on the production of opium in the world and in India, one will be able to see the genealogy of imbalance and inequality that always affected care. I turn to the state of Kerala to explore instances where these legal inflections live within the contemporary guidelines for palliative care and thus constantly affect the supply and delivery of care there. I suggest that the scarcity of morphine available in India for pain alleviation through legal channels is an extension of the asymmetrical hegemony that global biomedicine exerts on the rest of the world. In this case, the opioid crisis in the West, directly linked to the overprescription of opioids and the subsequent addiction crisis, precludes the possibility of pain relief being widely available in other transnational arenas. This further ties in with the much longer history of control of opium for the growth of global pharma, within which India has been uniquely placed. And for these reasons, I find Kaushik Sundararajan's conceptualization of pharmacracy on how global biomedicine increasingly came to determine the health and access of drugs in the global south an important rubric to understand the lack of availability of morphine in local contexts. So this is basically a slide of a graph which shows the consumption patterns of morphine in the year 2018. As you can see, the United States and Europe comprise almost 80% of the morphine consumption across the world. And in Kerala, the morphine is usually dispersed in the form of an oral tablet, which is morphine sulfate. These are 10 mg morphine tablets, which are being counted by a volunteer who works in the organization, the non-governmental organization or public health department, which disperses morphine. Just a brief history. I'm not going to delve into this in any detail because there's a lot been written about the history of opium control in the 20th century. So First and foremost, the most important single piece of legislation, the Single Convention of Narcotic Drugs in 1961, is suggested to even have imperial roots, which is basically a consolidation of all pre-existing colonial laws that promoted the illicit trade of opium. It substantially benefited the countries that legislated for it in 1961. The Single Convention was installed with a certain colonial rationality of prohibition that will also serve to improve or rather ensure the constant supply of raw materials like opium gum for the production of pharmaceutical products by companies in the West. So there were a bunch of, obviously there was a bunch of organizations that were set up in its wake. It is like the International Narcotic Control Board. Similarly, on the other end, in the 70s, as you all know, that the war on drugs campaign by Nixon was also put forward, which not only looked into the US, but also had transnational sort of dimensions to it. But unfortunately, most of this drug regulation or opium regulation always fall along the lines of the global color line, which is basically people from poorer backgrounds and people suffer from racial inequality at the receiving end of this regulation. Interestingly, one important point, which just to is that this sort of sale, this sort of regulation forwarded by the US to the Hague and Geneva Conventions early in the earlier 20th century was in such a way that they would help or suggest nations or support nations which were already going for a ban and thus helping them to marshal geopolitical power. Now, this is a brief pre-independence opium history. Again, this has been widely sort of talked about, and there's a huge amount of literature already extant. I just want to talk a few facts about it. Obviously, the opium produced for the foreign was produced for the foreign market under British colonial rule. But two important points. The first, the states which produced opium were three states which was established during the colonial rule were Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh. The opium processing factories were located in these very states, one in Ghazipur and the other in Neemuch in Madhya Pradesh. Another interesting thing that has to be talked about is even during the pre-independence era, the idea of opium control was a constant site of wrestling between the Indian National Congress, which was at the forefront of the Indian national movement, as well as with the British. The British wanted to keep the economy of opium alive, while the Indian nationalistic movement always wanted to ban it. And for that reason, the Indian national movement always supported the American movement, and they had ties between them. Now, the post-independence opium history of India. Again, a large amount of literature exists. I just wanted to suggest that these very factories were immediately rechristened as the government opium and alkaloid factories, funnily termed both. And there were two conferences that came to be post the Geneva Conventions and independence, which was one 1949 and 1956, which allowed for the laws to expand all across the country. The first major act which was considered to be draconian in many ways is the the Narcotics, Drugs, and Psychotropic Substances Act. Now, there was always like in any other country, there was addiction. But the fact of the matter is, in the 1990s, around the act, this sort of started an emergence of addiction. The addiction discourse started to begin very strongly so. But it was also forwarded, this NDPS Act, for instance, one must understand that is also put into place because the Cold War was going on and India was constantly being considered as a transit route between the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle, or actually Golden Triangle to the Golden Crescent. So, but in all actuality, there's a long history of local opium use in India between a lot of countries where opium is considered within marriage or ceremonial as a ceremonial significance. But then again, there was informal ways of controlling it, which I'll get to it later. Now, I'll just directly jump into Kerala. So the palliative Kerala movement is a unique movement which started in the 1990s. Now, Kerala is also a state which formed in 1950, which, unlike West Bengal, has a communist movement and also had a lot of social reformation movements in place. And because of that, it was always a social welfare state. So it always gave huge importance to education and health. So the palliative care movement in Kerala started in the 1990s and became expanded its reach around the early 2000s until today, where the government officially recognized this and has unveiled the palliative care policy on it. But the palliative care movement is also based on the delivery of morphine. So let me just go, like briefly introduce how this morphine, the control of morphine is in practice, and how these laws come to bear on the production of morphine. So the oral morphine tablets are produced by both Lissy Hospital's Pharmaceutical division and the Regional Cancer Center at Thiruvananthapuram, which is the capital of Kerala. Together, both these establishments provide tablets for the entirety of the state of Kerala in India at affordable prices. These are the only units in Kerala which have the requisite licenses to procure, produce, and supply narcotic drugs to all hospitals in the state and a few neighboring states. And yet, licensing of the process of morphine manufacture turns into an even more laborious work in practice. Each step of the process of reformulation, production, and transportation requires multiple licenses, each of which might not have similar expiry date, for instance. The license for transportation expires while the one for processing morphine still remains valid. So this is like very similar to the license Raj, a bureaucratic procedure that completely beats the movement. Similarly, strict enforcement of the law, together with the civil, excise, and anti-narcotic regulatory departments, construct eventually an atmosphere of illegality that is detrimental to the use of morphine in medicine. So, for a particular organization to disperse morphine, for example, in Kerala, the palliative organizations which disperses morphine are usually non-governmental organizations as well as the Kerala government primary health care centers. So how does that happen? So it is usually accorded a status called the recognized medical institution. The sanction of the RMI status will have to be sought through a formal application to the Drug Control of India. This application will have to be forwarded to a member of the advisory panel to the drug controller. Now, interestingly, the panel consists of 4 palliative care physicians, including a chair and 1 member from each geographical zone, namely South Central and South zones in Kerala, who will scrutinize the application and visit the facility to see if eligibility criteria are met. The training and the eligibility of the doctor, as well as the availability to secure storage and documentation facility will be verified. So each organization will have a stringent set of rules to store the morphine in place, and also multiple checks and balance, which sometimes completely defeats the purpose. Similarly, and that's on the RMI status. But because the to interject, I couldn't do a lot of research because of the COVID crisis. So I did do a bunch of phone interviews, out of which some things came to be. So according to one of the social workers I interviewed, who had been with several palliative care establishments, suggested that while these regulations and need for documentation are needed, it unfortunately makes many new medical officers reluctant to take up the responsibility as they see potential for trouble with the penal provisions of the law. The doctor of the RMI, or the recognized medical institution, may have to take all the responsibility if something goes wrong with the mode of dispersal documentation of the storage of morphine. The use of oral morphine medication is monitored meticulously and collectively by the active members of the local palliative care movement. So it's a volunteer-driven movement. So most of this documentation is also done by a lot of the volunteers. At different points in my fieldwork, I've encountered how the short supply or the lack of morphine with the government-run palliative care center is mitigated by the informal networks that some of the staff there have established with other palliative care centers within the same area. So sometimes when there's a lack of supply, these the government organizations and the non-governmental organization operating within the same area sort of trade morphine, but again within the legal framework. And this only happens when patient overlaps actually occur between these 2 organizations. Yeah, and the 2 other points. The other important point that I'd like to bring to bear is the opioid phobia, which directly comes from the opioid crisis in the US. Because of the continuously revealing nature and the damage that's being created by the opioid crisis, there's a fear in India that this release or a deregulation of morphine would completely completely produce a large number of addiction cases. Similarly, in Kerala, there have been anti-drug campaigns but with express political ends, both by the Communist Party of India as well as the Congress government, which are in power. For example, one of the popular media campaigns under the moniker Addicted to Life was introduced in 2014 by the then Chief Minister of Kerala, Uman Chandi. Similarly, 2019 saw the unveiling of statewide campaigns directed at morally correcting deviant youth in and through several drug campaigns. These outline addiction crises, real or imagined, against a backdrop of morality. Uh, so that's that. So, for example, this is the picture of a recognized medical institution. This is actually an NGO which I worked with during my prior field work, the last my master's studies. So this is how what it looks like, and inside this is how they work. These are a bunch of volunteers and patients together, sort of sorting through the provision of normal pharmaceuticals along with morphine. But the morphine disbursement is very strictly controlled and is only given by one single person. Sorry. And to the final slide, not taking much time, I think I've already, yeah. So this is, this whole history, I wanted to conceptualize this or to begin the rudiments of a certain conceptualization. So Kaushik Sundarajan's work definitely helps me in the process. Kaushik Sundarajan, in his book Pharmacracy, Value, Politics, and Knowledge in Biomedicine, makes a strong and expansive argument as to how big pharma often devise ways to control and maintain their monopoly across the world. Rajan suggests that this is done by bringing in international treaties such as GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and TRIPS, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, to bear down on governments across the world. In taking the case of India and the legislations the then incumbent government passed in the year 2005 session of Parliament, allowed for the entry of foreign pharmaceutical companies to invest and develop markets within the country. This allowed for a structural amalgamation of Indian law with international law through a process Rajan terms as harmonization. Harmonization refers here to the aligning of several legal, economic, and social processes that render a space where pharmaceutical capitalism may thrive. It is through this process of harmonization carried across several countries that allows multinational pharmaceutical corporations to extend and substantiate their monopoly in the global market. This is precisely where the history of opium, and by extension, the availability of morphine in India, must be imagined. The much longer and larger history of opium cultivation and its systematized production, primarily in the 20th century, have always catered to markets elsewhere. Despite the cultural use of opium to treat a variety of perceived ailments and its concomitant lack of availability as a pain relief medicine points to such a diversion of resources. For instance, clinical trials in India, in Rajan's ethnography, pointed to the availability of a vulnerable and often marginalized population to test drug effectiveness, while at the same time denying that very same population the therapeutic benefits of such a discovery. This is written into, or rather embedded into, a long-lasting framework of diversionary capital. Similarly, the story of morphine is intimately tied to the much longer history of opium production and diversion to international markets. It is then, much like a palimpsest that has several scripts scribbled over and dissolved, only to reveal history of texts beneath. So what I wanted to, the pharmacy argument as a conceptual category, it's not strong enough just to, it's explanatory at best, but to read into the multiple colonial laws at different instances and how the Indian state also sort of like collaborated with it unwittingly or with purpose, always relieve a much more layered text beneath the argument that all this morphine is produced for another country. So yeah, and that's about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nishant, for that very relevant and timely topic that a lot of places in the world dealing with right now. The opioid crisis, certainly an important topic. Looks like our third panelist, Ghani Jilani, is not going to make it this morning. We will ask her for slides that we'll try to share for people who are interested on our website later on. But on the plus side, that gives us about 20 minutes for a long question and answer session with our two panelists. I'd like to ask Malika to turn her camera on so we can have both panelists up for the question and answer session. We have some good questions in the chat right now. The first question is for Malika. Can you hear? There we go, Malika.
Yes,
first question
yes.
from Lucas Rickard. He said, thanks for the overview of pharmacy history in India, Malika. And he says your schematics were great. He wonders, can you say a bit more about some of the movements in India? For example, the community pharmacy or clinical pharmacy phase that apply to India.
Yes. Yes. Actually, there was there was no movement as such, but during the British period that we find, there was various drug acts, and there was the Drug Enquiry Committee held in 1930. Due to so that the spurious drugs don't enter in the country, and for that reason, the government of India appointed a committee under the chairmanship of Lieutenant Ramnath Chopra to look into the problem of adulteration and standardization of drugs. And then in 1930 came the Dangerous Drug Act. The Dangerous Drug Act came in 1930, and this is an act to centralize and vest in the federal government the control over certain operations relating to the dangerous drugs derived from opium, and to increase and render uniformity throughout the India. And also another thing is that in February 1945, Chemical Standardization Laboratory was established in Calcutta, and it was converted to the Central Drugs Laboratory to carry out statutory functions under the Drug Act, and the rules were also taken. And Dangerous Drug Act actually controlled under this act, it controlled the manufacture, the importation, the sale of certain drugs, but also exercised no precise bearing on the subject of adulteration or standards of strength. So basically, these were the movements that were taking place during that time. Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep. Great. Thanks for that answer.
Okay.
A lot of good questions coming in the chat. We have an interesting question for Nisant now from William Zellmer, former president of AIHP. He says politically, Kerala has had elected communist governments. He wonders, has that political philosophy had any effect on the state's approach to morphine use, production, and regulation?
Yeah, thanks for that great question. Yes, I would say so. To the Kerala government, the Kerala was essentially fought by the Aika Kerala movement, which is Unite Kerala movement by the Communist Party. So at the very formation of Kerala is the Communist Party, and it was unlike other communist governments. It was the first democratically elected communist government. And to recently, and this is far more important, because in my fieldwork, my earlier fieldwork, even Communist Party of India Marxists had their own palliative care centers, and thus they are very much involved in the whole process. And this sort of also, because of the sort of focus on the state, on the power of the state, they've always, from the 1960s onwards, they've had sort of exclusive focus. A large amount of money was given to for education and health. Now, even when the palliative care movement started, it was actually the left government that accepted and unveiled the palliative care policy. So ideologically, it has a lot of relevance there. Not only, it's not just the Communist Party too, but it's also the Congress governments that come into power as well. So now there is like the palliative care movement, and including morphine, is at a certain precipice, in that it is a political vehicle where a lot of parties try to make their own palliative care centers through the idea of an NGO. And this is a problem that we have to contend with for the longer future. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Another question from Malika from Stuart Anderson. He wonders, what influence did the Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain have on shaping pharmacy education in India during the colonial period?
Actually, in the British, they actually came to India as a trading people. Their major concern was trade in the beginning, but later on what they did, they actually institutionalized the medical system. And according to me, from my observation, that this is actually the direct impact of the British in our country, and also on the Western medical system and Western science. So they have institutionalized the system. They have institutionalized the medical system. Direct impact of the British rule.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, another question here for Nisant from Lucas Rickert. He wonders, Nisant, can you talk more about the moral panics? What gives rise to them? Are politicians involved? Are they communicated via newspapers, radio, television, internet? Just curious to learn more about these moral panics surrounding the opioid crisis.
Yeah, actually, it's very, very relevant because right now India is all boiling under a certain COVID crisis, but also a lot of the media coverage right now is about how Indian Bollywood actors and actresses are indulged in drug abuse or drug use. And this is a huge thing because it's the drug of all the drugs they could select was it was marijuana. And in fact, marijuana has a lot of historical uses in India itself. That is there. And for example, when the sort of moral panics that I refer to in the paper, it was always usually propagated by politicians through media campaigns. And it was always like there was this particular campaign called Break the Chain, which is the chain of drug use from one person to other. And so it's definitely, I mean, I wouldn't go on to suggest that how important are not like completely driven by political ideology, but these movements are important, yes. But sometimes there are political sort of undercurrents that are there to these moral panics. Yeah.
Excellent, very interesting stuff. Another question from Malika, from Bill Zelmer. He wonders, could you please comment on the nature of pharmacy education in India today? Is that education standardized throughout the country? Is there any particular Western model of pharmacy education, for example, the UK or the USA, that has a predominant influence on pharmacy education in India today?
Yeah, actually, no, there is no model as such but yes, today it is standardized. The pharmacy education is standardized today, and after independence it is standardized, the pharmacy education. And one thing I want to say here, that in coping up with the global environment, yes, in our pharmacy education we have incorporated some courses and materials, and students are also given some exposure so that they can attend international conferences and compete in international fellowships and all, and that is the thing going on. But now it is standardized here now. Yes, and in Jadavpur University we have the the pharmacy course for 3 years. The Benares Hindu University, the BHU has it. It's a very Madras Medical College has all these things. Actually, they are standardized. Yes, that's it.
Excellent. Very good answer. Now I have a question from Nisant from Professor Nancy Campbell. This might be a question she has asked him in other venues, but she wonders, are pharmacists involved in the NGOs dispensing of morphine? Who determines the dosage and prescribes?
Yeah, so the pharmacists are not directly involved with the process because it's completely regulated by the government. And these are the only, like I mentioned in the paper, there are only two institutions that are involved in the disbursement of sort of morphine. But in terms of dosage and all that, so each NGO, like a non-governmental organization which runs the palliative care group, also has a doctor in place. Only then they will get the status of the recognized medical institution. So they usually determine, they are responsible for determining what's the adequate dosage for a certain person. So yeah.
All right. Again, thanks for that answer. Really interesting, really important, relevant stuff. We seem to have run out of questions in the chat box. I'll give a couple moments, see if anyone has any questions come to mind as they think about these two interesting topics. I will give a pitch for our next event at the festival here, Panel 7, Traditional and Early Modern Drug Knowledge, starts in about 30 minutes. The link, of course, is on the festival program, the link for all festival events. I'll cut and paste that in the chat box again, just in case anyone's curious. I think we can wrap this panel up a little bit early. Thanks again to our two presenters, Nisant and Malika. Very interesting presentations, two very important, relevant topics. Thanks for everyone for attending. And again, we have a full schedule in the festival today, so I hope to see you at the other events for the rest of the day. Thanks a lot, presenters, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you.